We turn now to developments from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says grotesque greed of oil and gas companies and their financial backers is causing more hardship for poorest people and communities. He was speaking to reporters as he addressed global hunger and the COVID-19 pandemic at the UN headquarters in New York. The two largest U.S. oil companies, ExxonMobil and Chevron, British-based Shell and France's Total Energies combined earned nearly $51 billion in the most recent quarter, almost double what the group brought in for the year-ago period. He called on leaders to stop punishing their peoples.
I set up the global crisis response. It is immoral for oil and gas companies to be making record profits from this energy crisis on the back of the poorest people and communities and at a massive cost to the climate. The combined profits of the largest energy companies in the first quarter of this year are close to $100 billion. I urge all governments to tax these excessive profits and use the funds to support the most vulnerable people through these difficult times. And I urge people everywhere to send a clear message to the fossil fuel industry and their financiers that this grotesque greed is punishing the poorest and most vulnerable people while destroying our only common home, the planet. We are doing everything we can to reduce suffering and save lives in Ukraine and the region through our humanitarian operations. And Martin Griffiths will be able to soon brief you on those developments. But the war is also having a huge and multidimensional impact far beyond Ukraine through a threefold crisis of access to food, energy and finance. Household budgets everywhere are feeling the pinch from high food, transport and energy prices, fueled by climate breakdown and war.
In another development, the Kremlin says Russia's Gazprom would like to get back on Nord Stream 1 turbine that has been undergoing maintenance in Canada, but that it requires documents confirming that the turbine is not sanctioned. Russian government spokesperson Dmitry Peskov was speaking to the press in a telephone conversation. He mentions that Gazprom did not introduce sanctions against Russia affecting the turbine's return. He says it is Gazprom that is sanctioned and cannot receive the legal documents for the turbine. He says further that the EU can say whatever it wants and that the turbine has been serviced by the UK branch of Siemens Energy according to British law under British jurisdiction. Well, Dr. Latunji Shobande is an energy economist and climate risk expert. He joins me now from Aberdeen in the UK. Welcome to the program.
You're welcome, Millicent.
Thanks a lot. I mean, Russia's gas cutoffs upend European energy. We're seeing lots of debates on the continent struggling to cope what experts say is one of the worst ever energy crises, and it still could get much worse. What do you think is still to come for the European continent?
The European continent are facing a very great uncertainty regarding the energy and gas supply. And this winter will be very difficult because of the lack of supply from the Nord Stream. One thing that is sure is that if you look at there are 4 sources of energy to gas to the EU, and Russia appears to be, the largest part. So if Russia is unable to actually supply to the EU, there will be a very great disaster. But however, the EU already planned some options to actually resolve the problems. And one of these options is to introduce what we call energy mix, where they can use all the alternative energy sources and also get supply, and also practice what we call storage facility in order to remedy the situation.
You talked about energy mix. Is there in terms of one of the immediate ways out of this situation, but how visible or viable is it, seeing as prices are shooting through the roof?
Yeah, one of the consequences of when there is no gas, when there's scarcity, one of the consequences you face is that there will be increase in price. For example, in the UK here, we are expected to have almost £500 for household each month, who they will be paying for energy bill. Whereas in the EU, it might change, depend on the vulnerability of the environment. So these are one of the consequences because, they have to make some sacrifice in order to get energy to each of the household, especially during the winter period, which is actually, more cold.
Russia says the Nord Stream 1, the largest gas pipeline from Russia to Europe, is down for scheduled maintenance. But many officials and energy experts are worried that the crisis will only deepen this next maintenance, or rather after this next maintenance. Do you agree?
Well, it is normal for each of the turbines to, undergo, maintenance. But however, on this occasion, maybe going by the rate of, increase in sanction and the vulnerability of, some of the global economy, there is expected that, there will be disruption in supply chain. So I will not agree with that proposition in terms of maintenance because, it can be a form of retaliation and it can be a form of, maintenance. But given the fact that some of the Gazprom and some of the firms are saying that they cannot actually meet up with the earlier contracts they have signed with the EU, it might be a very great disaster because they may not be able to supply gas as expected.
And the Kremlin has been accused of energy blackmail, weaponization. Do you think this is the case here, a sort of energy injustice?
Well, it can be an energy injustice, especially when each of the household could not have access to energy at affordable price.
But Russia owns this energy we're talking about.
Yeah, it's possible that Russia owns the energy, but any policy made at the top, in the macroeconomics palace actually trickle down to affect the common man on the street. So each of these common man, each of these household are going to face this reality, not really, and because of that, the price will go up. Majority of the people who are going to be suffering, who are going to be facing this price are those who do not have higher income, which their income are relatively low. So if each of household is now paying £500 in order to have access to electricity for a month, which is even beyond the 10% of their salary, it means that there will be an energy injustice. So energy injustice is a situation just when there's what we call energy deprivation problem, where you cannot access energy at a lower cost, or possibly you are not getting the right energy to use.
Indeed, spiraling cost of living, inflationary pressures. In Norway, the European Union's biggest supplier, this is of natural gas, I believe. There have been some sort of shock in terms of industries, strikes in the oil and gas industries, which recently forced companies to shut production. Do you see more shock waves? And this is also coming on the back of what we've heard from the UN Secretary General, who said that some of the two largest U.S. oil companies are making a lot of money from this. What parts would you say, either by omission or commission, that they have played in what we're seeing?
Yeah, when we talk about shockwave, if you look at the energy price is a major, factor in productivity. So this time, what is going to happen, even in the winter period, is that energy will be relocated from the industrial sector back to the household. And in this situation, there will be low in productivity, And when there's low in productivity, there will be disruption in supply chain, especially when you are producing commodities to different places. So I quite agree that different shock wave will occur. There are about more than 6 shock waves we are expecting. We are expecting to see a situation of stagflation, where unemployment will rise with inflation. Then we're also seeing trade shock, which will be, disruption in exchange rates. We are also seeing major production that will suffer because majority of the industrial sector will not have access to, gas. And the problem again is that it is difficult to adjust the infrastructure of major industry to be able to meet up with the requirements. So there is need for gas to actually power and produce major commodity, especially in Europe.
All right, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Dr. Olatunji Shobande is an energy economist, climate risk expert. Perhaps another time we'll talk about, how this affects countries' climate goals. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
To other stories, one of the generals in the Ukrainian army says Russia may launch an offensive in the southern region of Kherson to try to win back momentum in the war, and it has been building up forces there. He says Ukraine has improved its tactical position around the eastern city of Sovyansk and recaptured 2 villages, but that Russian forces have been trying to take the eastern city of Adivka and village of Pisky. He also says Ukrainian forces have been forced to switch to defending the outskirts of Avdiivka. Earlier this week, President Volodymyr Zelensky described the pressure his armed forces were under in the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine as hell. 2 days ago, it was the Italian parliament, and yesterday it was the turn of the US senators who approved Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO. The Senate voted 95-1 to support ratification of the documents, easily surpassing the 2/3 majority of 67 votes required to support the ratification of the 2 countries. Both countries had applied for NATO membership in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, defying Russia's repeated warnings against their joining the alliance. They both still have some way to go before a full accession can take place, as parliaments of all NATO allies have to approve the move, and Sweden and Finland can be protected by the defense clause.
Russia's unprovoked aggression in Ukraine has changed how we think about the world's security. That's why I strongly support the decision of these 2 great democracies, Sweden and Finland, to join the most important and defensive alliance in the world, NATO. I am here to give my full support for Sweden and Finland entering NATO. Finland and Sweden taking the step of NATO membership will not only strengthen their own security, but the cause of freedom in Europe and around the world. And I would say, when things are tough, we keep our friends closer.
If Finland and Sweden join NATO, the alliance will unquestionably be stronger.
Our foreign policy should be about protecting the United States, our freedoms, our people, our way of life. And expanding NATO, I believe, would not do that. Expanding NATO will require more United States forces in Europe. More manpower, more firepower, more resources, more spending. And not just now, but over the long haul. Today, I submit that means voting against expanding NATO and focusing where we must to do what we must to deter an imperial China.
Back in Ukraine, the Southern Command Operation says Russian troops are regrouping to repel possible attacks from Ukrainian forces. Local news in Ukraine reported Wednesday that Russian forces were preparing counter-offensive to advance to southern Kherson. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry says Russian forces launched missile attacks on a warehouse in Radykhiv of Lviv, a blast in western Ukraine, and destroyed many Polish weapons and ammunition. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky branded as disgusting the behavior of ex-German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, who said Russia wanted a negotiated solution to the war. Schröder, who is a friend of President Vladimir Putin, said he met the Kremlin leader last week, adding there was even the possibility of slowly reaching a ceasefire. According to President Zelensky, it is simply disgusting when former leaders of major states with European values work for Russia, which is a war against these values, he said in his late-night video address. Presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolak earlier dismissed Schröder as a voice of the Russian royal court and said any negotiated peace settlement with Moscow would be contingent on a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops. Back to the United Nations, where Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he will launch a fact-finding mission into an attack in the frontline Ukrainian town of Olenivka that killed prisoners held by Moscow-backed separatists. Mr. Guterres told reporters Russia and Ukraine both requested an investigation. He said the terms of reference for the mission, which would need agreements from Russia and Ukraine, were being prepared.
Do an investigation in relation to... We received the request from the Russian Federation and the request from the Ukraine to do an investigation in relation to the events that you have mentioned. I decided, in line with my own competencies and powers, to launch a fact-finding mission. I have not the authority to do criminal investigations, but to launch a fact-finding mission. The terms of reference for that fact-finding mission are being prepared at the present moment. They will be shared with the governments of Russia and the Federation, the government of the Ukraine. I hope we'll be able to have an agreement on the terms of reference of that mission. We are at the same time looking for competent independent people that could integrate that fact-finding mission, and we hope to have all the facilities from both sides for access and for the obtention of all data that is necessary to be able to clarify the truth about what has happened. So this is a matter that we took very seriously, and we are working hard for that.
General,
Over to Kramatorsk, where residents there have been trying to get back to life as normal as possible. Today, they gathered at the flea market selling toys, Soviet medals and car parts in the eastern Ukrainian city. Speaking to a cross-section of them, 52-year-old Alexander says that he came to sell stuffed toys to have money for water and bread. Sitting at his improvised trading booth, another resident, Andrei, says he is not planning to evacuate the city. And also, the fierce fighting in the eastern Donetsk region continues. Hundreds of thousands of people are still living in combat zones. Of course, we heard in a televised address, Ukrainian president ordering the mandatory evacuation of citizens in the area, which Russia seeks to control completely, but most of them are not willing to leave.